इस वक्त हम आपको सीधे ले चलते हैं प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में जस्टिस JS वर्मा की। उन्होंने आज अपनी रिपोर्ट सौंपी है।
Great support which we have received not only from within the country but from outside also. It would just not have been possible. And I think my primary duty is to acknowledge that wide support which all of you have given and which has come even without our asking from persons whom we were able to contact for the first time. I think personally I am greatly indebted to the youth because but for them this issue would not have come up. And even though the issue was raised in a big way by the youth of this country who have shown the way how good governance can be achieved, but they have done it in such a mature manner that even at my age I thought it was something which was a novel experience for me. The maturity with which, I won't call it a movement, it was a spontaneous show of the feeling which the youth have for this most important feature, something which the governance by much older people, they were insensitive to. I was struck by the peaceful manner in which people not knowing each other, when I used to watch the news on the TV, I could see anyone standing there didn't know the person on the right or the left, but they had all risen to the occasion and come. And what was most satisfying was that it was the young men who were conscious that this injustice, gender justice, has got to be certainly got away with, and the constitutional guarantee of equality, you see, which is there more in rhetoric than in practice, is brought to retire. Now, even when there was provocation, they did not react and they continued to maintain their calm. It was really a very humbling experience for us who are much older in age. I could not imagine. And, well, if I may say so, that is something which I'm an incurable optimist. That's why I keep involving myself in things which many people think can't be done. But then the kind of satisfaction I have had in being involved in this exercise, it's not matched by anything, and I'm fairly old to say that I've had a lot of experience, but nothing like this, nothing like that. This goes to show that the youth have taught to us of the older generation something of which we were unaware, and this is the real hope of the country, for the future of our nation. And I think this is the brightest feature of the brightest aspect of this entire exercise. Let me be a little more specific now. Of course, it's not possible to name everyone in the country and outside who has contributed to the task. Well, this report may go by my name, but it's not, you see, just for the sake of show. But you see, I say it and I mean it. Well, mine is only the name. The contribution of everyone else is far greater. The young people you see sitting behind me, the youngest member of the team who led them, see, they are the real contributors. They are the real contributors. And you see, and that is the real hope and the assurance that this is only the beginning and this will be carried forward. But you see, in our country we have seen so many high programs being talked of, but after some time nothing is heard of them. But I have no doubt that all of them, with all of you, you see, you are going to ensure that what we have tried to do will be fully implemented. Now, with these few preliminary remarks, well, as I said, I can't name everyone who has contributed, but it is my duty also to acknowledge particularly some people from foreign countries who, having come to know that this exercise was on, they have volunteered and continued to help us all the time. I mean, when I look back, I myself can't believe how all this was possible within 29 days. When I offered to do it in 30 days, well, I thought, I didn't realize the magnitude of the task, but things started happening. And people coming to know, they have been helping. May I name a few of those persons from abroad? There are quite a few, but some who were involved throughout, professors, judges and whatnot. I'd like to name a few of them. Professor Sandra Friedman of the Oxford University, Professor Laura Heona of Oxford University, Professor Daniel Rosenfeld of the Harvard, Professor Shlomit Wallerstein of the Oxford University, Professor David Wilkins of the Harvard University, Judge Michael Kirby of Australia, Chief Justice Beverly McLean of Canadian Supreme Court, of her own. See, then Dr. Shekhar Shetadri from Nimansia, Dr. Samir Malhotra of AIMS, Dr. Shanta Sinha, who took the trouble to help us, a student of Oxford, Anirudh Mathur, another student here, Prateek Chadda. I don't have to name the people who are sitting behind me. You must have seen them throughout. So this is the kind of overwhelming support, and but for that it could not be done. May I now begin by first in telling you the methodology we have tried to adopt, because you will appreciate the time constraint was such that and also let me say, if I personally was brusque with any one of you or many of you, it was only to save time, and therefore most of the time I was not available. So I'm sorry for that, but then, and therefore most of the time I was not available. So I'm sorry for that, but then I thought it was justified because the time was needed for other things. The methodology which we adopted in this committee was like this. We said, the committee adopted the method of inviting suggestions from all stakeholders through a public notice. In addition, it interacted with a number of experts, social activists, interest groups, through their representatives to elicit their views on the subject. For the purpose of further elaboration of some of their suggestions, the committee also invited a number of representatives, eminent academics, for an oral interaction that you saw here only on the 19th and 20th we had. The committee directed the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, to issue a public notice inviting suggestions and recommendations, etc. Now that was done 23rd late night, the decision was made, and 24th itself, the next morning at 11 o'clock, this direction was given, and the next day the public notice was published, you see, inviting suggestions by January 5th. Well, the number of responses which came, there were almost 80,000. But I can assure you, these young people sitting behind me, each one of those responses was read. It's not that anyone was ignored. Then the committee also addressed letters. You see, I wrote letters, myself on behalf of the committee, to high dignitaries, including all chief justices, chief ministers, academia, women's organizations, etc., in addition to the public notice. Now, that's a long list. I'm not reading out the entire list. because we wanted as much information as we could get from all the stakeholders. Well, quite a few of them responded, and we have taken into account all of those things. Then continuously, even though I was not meeting, but then the method we had adopted was Mr. Gopal Subramaniam, you see, on behalf of the committee, I don't know how many persons he met, and he didn't refuse to meet anyone who wanted to come and meet him in addition to doing the work which he was doing all along. Then the data which was collected, it was phenomenal, unbelievable. And let me tell you, the entire office of Mr. Gopal Subramaniam was the infrastructure for this committee, but for that it would just not have been possible. And I don't want to embarrass him, but you see, he did not spend a single minute during this entire period to do his normal professional work, which in this mercenary world itself, I think is something to be taken note of, which goes to show the extent of devotion. And I would be failing in my duty if I do not mention Geeta, his wife. But for her support in the office and otherwise, we would not have been able to do what we have been doing. So the committee engaged in in-depth global research to gather material for reaching its conclusions and crafting the proposed amendments in legislation. The committee also analyzed past judgments, reviewed the trajectory of public policy and its sensitivity towards gender, and inquired into the differences of socio-political contexts in which uniform laws have been implemented. This led us to probe deeper in the recognizing multiple patriarchies and striking at a wider culture of misogyny through a change in educational practices. Let me say here, the three expressions used in the notification: aggravated sexual assault, speedy justice, and the consent thereof. We have tried to, interpret them in as wide terms as possible. Anything or any law which had any bearing on any of these aspects. For example, in the case of speedy justice, now all institutions, all of the justice delivery system, the police, that is investigation, prosecution, judiciary, even thereafter, the sentencing, the prisons and all that was, all that was addressed, and all laws relating to each of them. And that is why the police reforms came in. Because unless the policemen do their job properly, one major complaint always being FIRs not being registered, etc. Now, unless they do their job properly, the case would not reach the court. And if it reaches the court and the judiciary does not deliver speedy justice, which has been interpreted as a facet of Article 21, right to life with dignity, then it's mere rhetoric. It's nothing else. So, this is how. Even electoral laws. Now, if there is criminalization of politics and there is gender bias in the implementation of the electoral laws or in holding free and fair elections, that's something which is all related. This just to give you an example of why we went over the entire gamut of laws which had anything to do with ensuring gender justice, because we have seen the issue of gender justice on the basis of the constitutional guarantee. So it is actually the constitutional basis which is actually the foundation for this entire exercise that which we have tried to perform. Then the committee also sought extensive data from various ministries and departments of central and state governments to facilitate its task. The lukewarm responses received will be commented upon later on. I mean, there's the mildest we could say. People responding without being approached from foreign countries from day one. And, some people who may have been responsible for initiating the exercise of requesting us to be on the committee, their response came as late as yesterday in the evening at 5 o'clock when the report was, you see. So it was, I mean, these kind of difficulties, and therefore we value the responses which we received much more, and the oral interaction of so many people who came and spoke. You see, that's something which was, is something I don't have enough words to say how much we value it. Now let me read also part of the preface which would indicate, I mean, in substance, what is the kind of report we have tried to prepare. We have said the constitution of this committee is in response to the countrywide peaceful public outcry of civil society led by the youth against the failure of governance to provide a safe and dignified environment for the women of India who are constantly exposed to sexual violence. The immediate cause was the brutal gang rape of a young woman in the heart of the nation's capital in a public transport vehicle in the late evening of December 16, 2012. We refrain from saying anything more about the incident, which is sub judice for trial in a court of law. Was required to trigger the response needed for the preservation of the rule of law, the bedrock of Republican democracy. Let us hope that this tragedy would occasion better governance, with the state taking all necessary measures to ensure a safe environment for the women in the country, thus preventing the recurrence of such sexual violence. The urgency of the matter impelled the committee to undertake the performance of the assigned task within the short period of 30 days to enable the authorities with all their resources to take the necessary follow-up action within a further 30 days. Within a further 30-day period, so that the same or a substantial portion of the same may be completed before commencement of the next session of the Parliament, which we hope will undertake the needed legislative exercise recommended by this committee. Let me tell you how 30 days was decided. On the 23rd of December, when I was approached, and my colleagues also, and so I asked, before giving my consent, I said, when is the next session of Parliament? Well, the senior cabinet minister who had approached me, advisedly, I think, say, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I asked him, when is the next session of Parliament? Well, he must have thought this gentleman is not interested in politics, why is he asking? So he said 21st February. I thought there are 2 months. I said, let's do it in 30 days, 1 month. If what we can do, if we are able to do in half the time, then the government with all its might and resources should be able to do at least that much within the same amount of time. That's the reason for 30 days. But then, once again, but for you people it would not have been possible. The committee has been facilitated in the task by the overwhelming response to the public notice inviting suggestions within the available short time. An oral consultation was also held for interaction with the representatives of several stakeholders, particularly the women's social action groups and experts in the field. This stupendous task could not have been completed in time without the dedicated industry of a group of young lawyers, law graduates, and academics who worked around the clock to do the necessary research and study required for the preparation of this report. And they are those sitting behind me. We marvel at the extensive research done by them to collect relevant material from around the world on the subject within such a short span of time. Their contribution is acknowledged separately. Women's social action groups, which have been actively advocating the cause of gender justice for decades, also came forward to give valuable suggestions with the requisite supporting material. Many foreign contributors, including academia and students of prestigious foreign universities, also volunteered and rendered valuable opinions. The list is long, and the primary contributors are also acknowledged separately. I read out a few of those names. During this exercise, the committee has been reassured that a strict observance and faithful implementation of the constitutional mandate and the existing laws by a competent machinery is sufficient to prevent and, if need be, to punish any sexual harassment or assault. And the improvement needed in the laws, if any, is marginal, to await which is no excuse for the impairment of the rule of law. As a matter of fact, the measures already taken once the committee's constitution was announced, as the media has reported, goes to show that with the existing laws alone, how much more can be done, which could have been done earlier, to prevent this situation. We have focused also on the measures needed for prevention, because why should you only think of the medicine which is needed to cure the malady? Why not ensure that the root cause is not there? So prevention, that old adage, prevention is better than cure. Have a safe environment so that such incidents don't happen. Because, you see, that is far more important. Correction of the societal mindset of its gender bias depends more on social norms and not merely on legal sanction. The deficiency in this behalf has to be overcome by the leaders in the society, aided by the necessary systemic changes in education and societal behavior. This view of the committee is buttressed by the fact that executive, meanwhile, has taken several measures to this effect under the available regimen, and the judiciary too has issued several directions under the existing laws to ensure safety and protection of the dignity of women in public places and in public transport. Failure of good governance is the obvious root cause for the current unsafe environment eroding the rule of law, and not the want of needed legislation. If there was a felt need for more laws, there are many recommendations of expert bodies and judicial decisions that remain unimplemented. The Law Commission's 84th report in 1980, you see, by a very distinguished Chief Justice P.V. Dixit, and its 172nd report of 2000, which is by Justice Leela Sage, relating to the subject. The National Police Commission reports, starting from 1978, recommending autonomy and seminal improvement in the quality of police force, which is the principal machinery for the maintenance of law and order, continue to gather dust for decades due to the apathy of all the political dispensations. The Supreme Court's judgment of 2006 in Prakash Singh's case, giving certain directions for the autonomy and improving the quality of the police force, remain to be implemented by all the governments. Action in this behalf does not brook any further delay if there is a genuine desire to honor the purpose of constituting this committee. Now, you see, one of the interesting features, I say it interesting because it's laughable, you see, the response was expected from all the DGPs who were addressed even separately. There was hardly any response from any one of them. And there was a mocking news report in one of the national dailies which said, DGPs ignore the committee. I don't know what it meant. I mean, if that is the apathy of the DGPs, I mean, it's not that we want it to elevate ourselves. We are trying to serve a public cause. And if that is the attitude of the DGPs, well, I mean, something needs to be done to review the appointment of all those DGPs, which is one of the recommendations we have made. Attitudinal changes to correct the aberration of gender bias have to be brought about in the institutions of governance to improve the work culture, and in civil society to improve the social norms for realizing the constitutional promise of equality in all spheres for the women folk. The workmen must improve the work culture instead of quarreling with the tools. In the committee's view, without the improvement in this aspect, this mere additions to the statute book are of no avail. Focus on the machinery implementing the laws is therefore a significant part of this exercise. The committee hopes that the concern and urgency shown by the government in constituting it will not wane with the passage of time and the publication of our report, and that the constitutional promise of gender justice in a social order with the egalitarian ethos will soon be realized without much ado. A positive reaction to the tragedy which triggered this response of the government would be the real tribute to the memory of the victim of gang rape and to the honor of the women folk. The committee concludes its task with this fervent hope. That is what we have tried to say. Now let me read out a few, just to give you a gist of what this report is all about. Well, we have quoted Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, there's nothing about which Mahatma Gandhi had not spoken. At least till now I have not been able to find any subject on which he did not give advice to the countrymen. And this is one of the quotes from Mahatma Gandhi. Woman is the companion of man, gifted with equal mental capacities. She has the right to participate in the minutest details in the activities of man. And she has an equal right of freedom and liberty with him. She is entitled to a supreme place in her own sphere of activity as man is in his. This ought to be in her own sphere, this ought to be the natural condition of things, and not as a result only of learning to read and write. By sheer force of a vicious custom, even the most ignorant and worthless men have been enjoying a superiority over women which they do not deserve and ought not to have. Many of our movements stop halfway because of the condition of our women, unquote. So this is what is actually the constitutional basis or foundation of gender justice that we have tried to talk about. Then we say rape, sexual assault, eve-teasing and stalking are matters of serious concern, not only because of the physical, emotional and psychological trauma which they engender in the victim, but also because these are practices which are being tolerated by a society ostensibly wedded to the rule of law. Let me here pause and say that merely addressing the end stage of rape is not the solution. You have to deal with the first steps which ultimately graduate and post-graduate into the aggravated form of sexual assault. The fundamental rights to life with human dignity, to equality and to work in one's chosen profession or trade, these are 14, 19, 21, include protection from sexual harassment. It is indubitably the position that the Constitution guarantees fundamental freedoms to women. In view of Article 15(3), which enables the state to make special provisions for women and children, the equality of women and children is firmly enshrined in Article 14 as well as Article 15(1) of the Constitution. It is also necessary to note that Article 21 applies equally to women. Article 21 capital A, brought in by amendment, which guarantees the right to education, applies to all children irrespective of gender. Article 23 prohibits traffic in human beings and forced labor. That is also a related issue. Article 24 protects children and enjoins that no child below the age of 14 years will be employed to work in any factory or mine or hazardous employment. It may also be noticed that Article 51, capital A, Clause E, provides that it shall be the duty of every citizen of India to renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women. So not only the state responsibility, the responsibility and fundamental duty of every citizen of India. And that's why the issue, we have gone into the issue of trafficking, child labor, you see, all those things. In fact, the preamble of the Constitution guarantees social, economic and political justice, which in the view of the committee would include gender justice, liberty of thought expression, belief, faith and worship, equality of status and opportunity, that would again reinforce the theory of equality, while fraternity enjoins citizens to treat each other with respect and dignity regardless of gender. The right to be protected from sexual harassment and sexual assault is therefore guaranteed by the Constitution and is one of the pillars on which the very construct of gender justice stands. The right is buttressed by the directive principles of state policy contained in 38, 39, 39A. They are actually the constitutional philosophy of a social order which, with egalitarian ethos, for the purpose of constituting a welfare state. Every person invested with public power remains primarily a citizen, who is duty bound to perform the fundamental duties of every citizen, with the added public duty of implementing the directive principles of securing a social order for the promotion of welfare of the people. F. Rai, the duty of the state therefore is to provide a safe environment at all times for women who constitute half the nation's population, and failure in discharging this public duty renders it accountable for the lapse. The state's role is not merely reactive to apprehend and punish the culprits for their crimes. Its duty is also to prevent the commission of any crime to the best of its ability. Crimes against women are an egregious violation of human rights, demanding strict punishment with deterrence to prevent similar crimes in future by the like-minded. All of you are aware of the 2002 Gujarat violence. In that context, the National Human Rights Commission had made an order indicating the state responsibility and the emerging principle of human rights jurisprudence. A few sentences from that I would like to read to you. It says, I quote, "It is the primary and inescapable responsibility of the state to protect the right to life, liberty, equality and dignity of all of those who constitute it. It is also the responsibility of the state to ensure that such rights are not violated either through overt acts or through abatement or negligence. It is a clear and emerging principle of human rights jurisprudence that the state is responsible not only for the acts of its own agents, but also for the acts of non-state players acting within its jurisdiction. The state is, in addition, responsible for any inaction that may cause or facilitate the violation of human rights." So, it is responsible for that inaction also. So the committee has proceeded to perform its task on the basis of the above constitutional obligation and juristic principles enunciating the state's responsibility for the protection of the right to life with all aspects of human dignity of women. This is also the demand of the fundamental rights, which I have already read out to you. The substantive laws must meet these standards, and the machinery prescribing the procedure for their implementation must be adequately equipped for it. That's where, you see, police reforms are very important. If you have DGPs who think they can ignore, you see, paying any attention to this important issue, then certainly that has got to be addressed first. The purpose of laws is to prescribe the standard of behavior of the people and to regulate their conduct in a civilized society. Faithful implementation of the laws is of the essence under the rule of law for good governance. In the absence of faithful implementation of the laws by efficient machinery, the laws remain mere rhetoric and a dead letter. Then we have quoted what Dr. Rajendra Prasad said at the concluding session of the Constituent Assembly. In short, what he had said was, he said, whatever the Constitution may or may not provide, the welfare of the country will depend upon the way in which the country is administered. Just as you may have a very efficient machine, but if the machine man is not equal to the task, well, the machine by itself won't be able to. So and then he ended by saying, it requires men of a strong character, men of vision, men who will not sacrifice the interests of the country at large for the sake of smaller groups and areas, and who will rise over the prejudices which are born of these differences. We can only hope that the country will throw up such men in abundance. Then Amartya Sen recently, in his book The Idea of Justice, echoed the same sentiments when he said, there is no automatic guarantee of success by the mere existence of democratic institutions. The success of democracy is not merely a matter of having the most perfect institutional structure that we can think of. It depends inescapably on our actual behavior patterns and the working of political and social interactions. There is no chance of resting the matter in the safe hands of purely institutional virtuosity. The working of democratic institutions, like all other institutions, depends on the activities of human agents in utilizing opportunities for reasonable realization. We are only referring to undisputed facts in public domain. Fact about the Delhi gang rape incident which has led to this thing. And, well, I must say, I was shocked when I saw, you see, soon after that incident, you see, the police commissioner of Delhi being given a pat on the back for his prompt action by a person no less than the Home Secretary. I was so shocked as a citizen that, and if I haven't spoken earlier, it was because I wanted to, you see, not say anything till I completed this task. But then, and I'm talking of that which is in full public knowledge. Now, the least I, putting myself in that place, would have done was to seek an apology for the failure of my duty to protect these citizens whose safety was entrusted to me. So, instead of that, and that is why you may have the most efficient, you have all these laws, but if they are not worked by people with that kind of sensitivity which is required. So what is needed is that sensitivity, which indeed is the most important aspect. The most perfect laws also would remain ineffective without the efficiency and individual virtuosity of the human agency for implementing the laws, namely the law enforcement agencies. The mechanism has to be supported by the complementary role of civil society as envisaged in the fundamental duties of the citizens. I have read Clause E. Equally shocking was the fact in public knowledge, large number of persons passed by where that poor girl and her companion completely distraught and, you see, suffering from all those injuries. No one offered help. So that was, if everyone's duty is to renounce practices like that, then at least you have to. So where are those citizens So total apathy of everyone who had a duty to perform. See, and that is why we have also quoted what Aristotle said in his celebrated work, The Politics. He said, he emphasized on the significance of education of citizens in the spirit of the Constitution. He said thus, the greatest of all means for ensuring the stability of constitutions, but which is nowadays generally neglected. And he said it 325 BC, and we are now in 2013 AD. But which is nowadays generally neglected is the education of citizens in the spirit of the Constitution. So I think that's where the civil society also has failed. Thus, if these are guaranteed freedoms under the Constitution, how do they become real freedoms? And how do they enable women to possess requisite capabilities which would lead to the fulfillment of their potential as individual citizens? Then Amar Sen's capability approach has been quoted. The idea of capability, that is the opportunity to achieve value combinations of human functioning, what a person is able to do or be, can be very helpful in understanding the opportunity aspect of freedom and human rights, etc. We quoted that. While the committee, then we say this, while the committee is of the view that there is merit in the capability approach propounded by Professor Amartya Sen, it must... Thank you. It must also be borne in mind that the ability to dictate needs and desires, including the capacity and ability for consumption as well as income generation, are not irrelevant factors. The committee is unable to disregard the subjugation of women, which has been occasioned in India on account of the lack of financial independence and security. Hence, while acknowledging that the capability approach does address a series of other issues in relation to women, it is necessary as a part of the overall change of consciousness that women must be made equally capable and productive for the purpose of becoming self-sufficient financially, which would be one of the intrinsic safeguards for feeling and perceiving equality. So whole thing is, you see, that equality you ensure and the rest follows. And we have also quoted, you see, Mahbubul Haq was another great Asian and who brought gender as an indicator of human development. I recall, and I never failed to mention that, he used that very sensitive catchphrase. He said, human development unless engendered is fatally endangered. Now I think that says all about it. Now, this is his, as he died in 1998, and before that this was his vision, quoted in the 1999 Human Development Report of 2000. He said, and I quote, as we approach the 21st century, we hear the quiet steps of a rising revolution for gender equality. The basic parameters of such a revolution have already changed. Women have greatly expanded their capabilities over the last few decades through a liberal investment in their education. At the same time, women are acquiring much greater control over their lives through dramatic improvements in reproductive health. They stand ready and prepared to assume greater economic and political responsibilities, and technological advances and democratic processes are on their side, etc., etc. Then he ends by saying, it is quite clear that the 21st century will be a century of much greater gender equality than the world has seen before. Now, you see, is that true in India with these kind of incidents happening? That is the query we have posed and tried to answer. Now, it is an admitted fact that women in India have suffered in various aspects of life and physical health mental well-being, bodily integrity and safety, etc. Now, we are of the opinion that the Indian women have substantially suffered on most of these counts, as a consequence of which the de facto equality guaranteed by the Constitution has not become a reality to them. And that's why you can't confine, we could not confine ourselves only to certain provisions of the IPC or CRPC. The wide spectrum has got to be examined. Every aspect which affects, you see, the women's constitutional right of equality. The achievement of empowerment and equality of women has to be necessarily a conjoint effort of the individual and the state. I have already referred to that part. Now, methodology, I have mentioned to you what we have adopted. I would like to read a few other parts. The foundation, constitutionalism, republicanism and gender equality. And here there is a very, you see, interesting simile which has been quoted in the beginning, prejudice. Because here everything, the mindset is affected by prejudice. Prejudice, it's like a hair across your cheek. You can't see it. You can't find it with your fingers. But you keep brushing at it because the feel of it is irritating. It is that prejudice which really ultimately affects, you see, without saying so. We wish to base a large number of our conclusions on the theory of constitution. This is the important basis. The actions of those in authority have been in conflict with constitutional theory under which citizens of India are entitled to equality. We wish to say that equality is the bedrock of the Constitution. However, what is meant by equality under the Constitution, its manifestations, and whether this enables a citizen to have a greater say in governance is one of the fundamental questions which arises before this committee. Thus, it is important to state that even though a government may enjoy popular public will, unless and until its actions are informed by constitutionalism, it will be unable to discharge the obligations towards citizens which are guaranteed under the Constitution. The way in which these rights are made visible in life, society, and on a practical and continual basis is the obligation of the state. This cannot be more telling in the context of women, their rights and their empowerment. The word republic is also vital to understand the constitutional values which are embedded within the Constitution. We are aware of the cultural and regional diversity and pluralism which exists in Indian society. The idea of republic, we must bear in mind, is a Platonian concept which also was adopted after the French Revolution. In fact, we agree with the scholarly exposition in Jennings' analysis about citizenship, republicanism and multiculturalism.